Elena Rivers never liked birthdays, not even her own. So when Mia insisted she attend a glamorous gala filled with strangers and champagne, she hesitated. But friendship has a way of pushing us where comfort won't. Wrapped in a dress she didn't pick and heels she could barely walk in, Elena smiled through the noise. The glittering chaos of the evening made her feel like an outsider in a world too fast, too polished. The drinks came quickly, and so did the dizziness. Elena wasn't used to alcohol. One glass turned into three, and laughter blurred into confusion. Wandering through golden hallways and velvet carpets, she opened the wrong door, guided by fate or maybe by mistake. There, under the soft light of a luxury suite, stood a man whose name she didn't yet know. This wasn't just a real story unfolding. It was the kind that rewrites everything quietly. Julian Hart wasn't expecting company, especially not a stumbling girl with mascara smudged and shoes in hand. He could have called security into the scene in seconds. But something in her, maybe the innocence, maybe the vulnerability, froze him. He watched as she curled into the corner of the plush bed like a lost child. With a sigh and a strange ache in his chest, he draped a blanket over her and took the sofa. It was one of those emotional story moments that sneak up on you. Julian lay awake staring at the ceiling, confused by how this stranger managed to soften a man who had been hardened by boardrooms and betrayals. She didn't even know his name, yet her presence cracked something in him. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first time he'd felt something real in years. And that terrified him. The morning after was quiet. Elena left before he woke, unaware of the impression she left behind. Julian found the faint imprint on the pillow, the scent of her perfume still lingering like a whisper. He told no one, just kept the memory tucked away like a secret, something too fragile to explain. He didn't even expect to see her again. But life, as always, had other plans. There's a kind of magic in mistaken moments, when two lives cross paths without warning or reason. It's not always grand. Sometimes it's clumsy, embarrassing, and soaked in champagne. But sometimes it opens a door to something far deeper than either of them can see. For Julian and Elena, this wasn't just one of those touching stories you hear about. It was the beginning of something they'd both spent their whole lives unknowingly waiting for. And though they returned to their separate lives that day, something shifted, like a thread had been tied between two strangers who weren't strangers anymore. Julian didn't know it yet, but fate was about to pull that thread tighter. Because just when he thought it was over, Elena would walk back into his world. This time, not by mistake, but by assignment. Elena's heart nearly stopped when she walked into the sleek glass building and saw him. There, standing in the center of the executive floor, was Julian Hart. No longer just a mysterious stranger from a hotel suite, but now her new boss. She froze. What were the odds? Her stomach twisted as she realized the emotional story she thought had ended was just beginning. Julian, on the other hand, was stunned into silence. He recognized her instantly, though his face betrayed nothing. Behind closed doors, he paced, torn between curiosity and caution. Elena wasn't just another employee. She was the girl who unknowingly slept in his bed. Something about that real story refused to let go of him. And now, she was right here in his office. He began to assign her tasks. Too many, too specific. From managing his schedule to accompanying him to client meetings, Elena found herself constantly in his orbit. It wasn't punishment, but something else. A magnetic pull neither of them spoke about. The air between them grew thick with the weight of unspoken things. Their eyes met across conference tables and elevator rides, never for too long, but always long enough. Sometimes, he'd catch her tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and it would disarm him. Other times, she'd glance at him and quickly look away, unsure if the feelings were mutual or just imagined. Every shared silence became a sentence in their invisible book of touching stories. Elena struggled to stay professional, her cheeks flushing whenever their hands brushed over folders or coffee mugs. She feared he might bring up that night, but he never did. Instead, he remained formal, composed, yet his eyes always softened when they landed on her. It was as if they were both walking on a tightrope, suspended between boundaries and desires. The office, once a sterile space of deadlines and ambition, now pulsed with quiet tension. Co-workers didn't notice, but Elena felt it in every heartbeat. Julian's presence overwhelmed her, not with authority, but with something deeper, something he didn't seem to know how to express. And even though no words were exchanged, she felt seen. Maybe for the first time in her life. She kept wondering what it all meant. Why hadn't he brought up the hotel? Why did he look at her like that? Elena didn't know if she was walking towards something beautiful or straight into heartbreak. But one thing was certain. This emotional story between them was far from over. And it was only a matter of time before one of them broke the silence. It started with a text. "Mr. Hart isn't feeling well today." Elena had overheard his assistant whispering about Julian working through the night again. She hesitated, unsure if stepping in would cross a line. But something in her heart urged her to act. So she cooked chicken soup, the kind her mother swore cured anything, and nervously brought it to his office. Julian blinked in surprise when she appeared in the doorway, holding the warm container with both hands. No one had ever done that for him, not since he was a boy. He tried to decline, awkwardly brushing her off, but Elena simply smiled and left the food on his desk. That small, thoughtful gesture did something no business deal ever had. It broke him just a little. From that day forward, Elena became a quiet presence in his world. She wasn't pushy, never demanded anything, but her care spoke volumes. Fresh tea appeared on his desk during long meetings. Notes with corrected grammar sat on his reports. It was all so subtle, yet deeply personal. Julian found himself looking forward to these invisible threads of affection. He started noticing the way she hummed under her breath when filing papers, or how she bit her lip when concentrating. These tiny details, once background noise in his busy life, became music. Elena wasn't just a secretary anymore. She was warmth in a world that had grown too cold, too sharp. This wasn't just a job for her, and he felt it. Julian tried to keep his distance, tried to remind himself that emotions didn't belong in the office. But she kept slipping past his defenses. One glance, one handwritten note, and suddenly he was questioning every rule he had lived by. She never asked for his attention, yet she had it. Without a word, Elena was rewriting his entire emotional story. Elena noticed the shift too. He no longer avoided her eyes. Sometimes his hand lingered for a second too long when passing her a file. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. It scared her, but also made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. The connection between them deepened, silently. Neither of them dared to speak it aloud, but the room always felt different when they were alone. Like something gentle was blooming where walls once stood. Elena couldn't tell if it was real or if she was imagining it all. But deep down, she knew this was no longer just about office tasks. And soon, something unexpected would force their walls to collapse entirely. The snow came fast, unannounced. One moment, they were leaving a client dinner. The next, their car skidded into a blanket of white, all routes closed. Elena and Julian found themselves stranded in a countryside inn with flickering lights and no spare rooms. Just one key, one bed. It felt like the universe was done playing subtle, and now it was forcing them to face the truth head-on. Julian paced the room, jacket still on, trying to mask his nerves. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, eyes on the storm outside, heart thundering louder than the wind. The silence was loaded. Neither of them knew what to say, but everything was screaming between them. This wasn't just an awkward work trip anymore. It was the turning point of their emotional story. Eventually, they settled, Julian on one side, Elena on the other, the air between them thick with tension. And then, under the dim glow of a bedside lamp, Elena whispered something honest. Something about how lost she felt, how small she still saw herself in a world that never made space for girls like her. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. Vulnerability became her strength. Julian listened, really listened, maybe for the first time in years. He wasn't the CEO in that room, just a man, broken in places no one ever dared to look. He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. No grand gesture, Just fingers interlaced, two people anchoring each other against the storm outside and the ones inside. That touch said everything he couldn't. They kissed, not out of passion, but out of safety, understanding, connection. It wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The kind of moment that only happens when both hearts are stripped bare, with no audience, no script. A quiet fire lit between them, burning through old fears and melting every defense they'd built. But morning came, and so did the guilt. Julian stood by the window, watching the plows clear the road, a war raging behind his eyes. He told himself she deserved someone better, someone who wouldn't mess things up. When Elena stirred and looked for him with soft hope in her eyes, he turned cold, said little, pulled away, left her more confused than ever. Elena didn't ask for promises, she just wanted honesty. But his silence hurt worse than any goodbye. And as they drove back in strained silence, the snow fading in the distance, something inside her cracked. She had opened her heart. He had closed his. And yet, even with that pain, the real story between them was far from over. Because storms don't just pass, they leave something behind. Elena sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the two pink lines with trembling hands. Her breath caught in her chest as the truth sank in. She was pregnant. Alone in her apartment, she let out a soft, bitter laugh. Life really didn't wait, did it? One night of vulnerability had given her the most terrifying, beautiful news she'd ever received. For days, she rehearsed what to say to Julian. But each time she saw him in the office, cold and distant, the words died in her throat. He barely looked at her anymore. Whatever warmth had existed between them had vanished, and she didn't know why. Her emotional story had become one-sided, and that realization stung more than she expected. Then came the final blow. Elena walked into his office, only to see Julian in a quiet embrace with Vanessa, his glamorous ex-fiancée. Vanessa looked perfect, tailored dress, confident smile, everything Elena felt she'd never be. The sight shattered her. Her heart clenched, not just for herself, but for the tiny life growing inside her. That was the moment she knew she had to leave. Elena handed in her resignation the next morning, her voice steady though her soul trembled. She didn't cry, not in front of him. Julian, caught off guard, didn't ask questions. He just watched her walk away, not realizing she was carrying the one thing that could have changed everything. Sometimes, silence does more damage than any words ever could. She packed her bags that night, left the city lights behind for the quiet streets of her hometown. Her mind was a storm of doubt, anger, fear, but also fierce love. She didn't know what came next, but she knew this. She would raise her child with or without him. This wasn't just a touching story. It was her story now, and she refused to let it begin with heartbreak. Julian noticed her absence instantly. The coffee cup she always placed on his desk was gone. Her quiet knock, her notes, her presence vanished. At first, he thought she was being dramatic. Then the weight of it hit him like a punch. She wasn't playing games. She was gone. And the moment he realized it, his world tilted off its axis. He searched everywhere, called, emailed, even asked Mia. But no one gave him answers. And deep down, he knew why. He'd let fear speak louder than love. He'd pushed her away without ever listening. Now, he was left with an empty office and the ache of a real story slipping through his fingers. But something in his chest wouldn't let him give up. Not yet. The rain was relentless as Julian stepped off the bus in a quiet town he'd never been to. He clutched a wrinkled cafe receipt in his hand, the only clue he had. His suit was soaked, but he didn't care. He had one goal: to find Elena, to finally say everything he should have said that morning after the snowstorm. He spotted her through the fogged-up window of a cozy little cafe, wiping down a table, unaware that the world was about to shift again. For a second, he froze, afraid she might ask him to leave. But the fear didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the emotional story still unfinished between them. He stepped inside, heart pounding like a war drum. Elena turned, stunned. She hadn't seen him in weeks, hadn't expected him to show up, especially not looking like a man undone by love. He didn't speak at first, just walked toward her with eyes that held more than words ever could. Then, in front of everyone, he fell to his knees. And finally, he told her everything. He spoke of the night in the hotel, the soup, the snowstorm. How her kindness healed parts of him he never showed. How his fear of not being enough made him pull away. He said he was sorry, not just for leaving, but for not knowing how to stay. It was raw. It was messy, but it was real. A true, real story in every broken syllable. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she didn't cry. Not until she whispered, "I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a tidal wave. His breath caught, his world narrowed. And then, for the first time, he smiled. Not out of shock, but because in that moment, everything made sense. He wasn't just fighting for love anymore. He was fighting for family. He stood and gently took her hand. Promised he wouldn't run again. Promised he'd be there. For her, for the child, for all the chapters still unwritten. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about building a future rooted in truth, not fear. And as they held each other, soaked in rain and second chances, the cafe faded into the background. They didn't have all the answers. But for once, that was okay. Life didn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It just had to be honest. As they walked out into the storm, hand in hand, there was no grand ending, only a quiet beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that's how the most touching stories truly begin. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have told him about the baby or walked away in silence? And do you think Julian truly deserved a second chance? Or was Elena taking too big of a risk? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of their story touched you the most. Speech balloon. And hey, if this emotional story moved you, imagine what's coming next. Back-end index pointing right, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next real story full of twists, love, and second chances. Your next favorite touching story is just one click away.